To join the swarm list, you simply have to contact Andre Krugelkopf to ask to be added, or you have to click the appropriate button in the application form to join the Alameda County Beekeeper Association. We do not have a membership tenure requirement, but we do strongly recommend that anyone who wants to chase swarms tag along with someone who has chased or who is chasing swarms to gain some experience and see how one actually deals with some of the problems associated with going out and collecting swarms, the kinds of equipment that people need to apply to particular situations. It's really nice to, especially if you have no experience at all with bees, to see how someone actually handles the swarm. Knowledge and a feel for the bees is really very helpful when you go out to collect your first swarm by yourself. We also urge people who go collecting swarms to help out the newbies by offering them the opportunity to come and tag along and maybe help out, to watch, to observe. And swarm catching in the general sense is kind of a survival skill for the beekeeper. Let's be good neighbors. Let's manage our colonies so that we minimize swarming. Let's collect our own swarms, and for that matter, collect other swarms that come in from the neighborhood. Set up bait boxes. That helps reduce the amount of drama in the neighborhood. And be ready to educate the public whenever you're out collecting a swarm. It's always fun and quite dazzling. Swarm chasing is fun. Sometimes it's very challenging. Also, as a community of members of the swarm list, we kind of have your back. If you email the list that you've got a problem that you need some suggestions on, we'll be glad to offer some suggestions. Some people may even be able to free themselves up to come out and help you do whatever you're trying to accomplish. If a swarm is close by and needs to be collected, please do. If you have too many bees in your yard, you can always give the swarm away. But it's pretty important for community relations to be a proactive, supportive member of your local community and fit in. And that's one of the ways you gain recognition for yourself, for beekeeping, and for the bees. And let's also try and keep the genetics local. Obviously, the bees don't care about the crisis that we're going through. But as beekeepers, we can certainly help keep ourselves safe by keeping our distance. We can supervise the situation so that other people stay safe. And let's use common sense and safety practices. The wind, for example, don't position yourself downwind from people and don't position yourself upwind from people. The wind can be your friend in this case. So Jonathan Zamek in about 2010, 2011 realized that we had kind of an untenable situation with the swarm arrangement that the club had at the time. The membership was much smaller at that time, and there were a few people in the club who seemed to dominate the swarm collecting, and new members who wanted or needed local bees were kind of frozen out in the process. So Jonathan undertook to identify a phone service provider that would ring out whenever anyone called our swarm hotline number, 510-898-6696. So anyone that's programmed into the application, their phone rings when someone presses 1 in response to the menus. And then The effect, also the plan for the new scheme was to try and make the distribution of swarms a little bit more fair by having an intermediate layer of volunteers who took the calls. And when those calls were published out to the email list, the first responder on the email list was the one who got the swarm. This stays away from the problem of sending out the location to everybody at the same time, and then everyone jumps in their car and the first one there gets it. That's not efficient from many sides, and certainly isn't very fair. So we also ask that when people have gotten a swarm recently, they kind of back off on making a claim from the swarm list, so that other people can have an opportunity to get swarms. And we have a reasonable window, though, of about 20 minutes or 30 minutes or so, because as long as the swarm volunteer has the swarm to be handed off, then he's kind of tied to the computer. So we appreciate that people respond relatively quickly, and but we also give the volunteer the opportunity to chase the swarm themselves if it's been sitting on the sitting out announced for too long of a period of time. Do I have a duplicate slide here? I think I may have a duplicate. Okay. Well, anyway, this year our current set of volunteers are George McRae, Eleanor Levine, Pam Weimer, Andre Krugelkoff, Richard Godfrey, and myself. We've been doing this for, I think, the past, this is our third year of doing that. They've gotten some experience and handled over 700 calls last year. And part of the job of being a volunteer is you get to do the filtering. And you can see on the right-hand side of the slide that last year there were about 300 swarm calls that came in. There were some members of the club who volunteered information that they had collected swarms that didn't come in via the swarm hotline. There were about 150 colony extractions announced. And then other interesting categories like foraging bees, bee trees, bumblebees, carpenter bees. So it's kind of fun trying to sort out what's what, and to make sure that what's being reported is really honeybees, and that the right connection gets made. And we thank those people, for instance, who are taking care of the bumblebees for being responsive in those cases too. Okay. So we need to all be responsible beekeepers out in the field. Be ambassadors for the bees. Please don't make things up for the entertainment of yourself or the spectators. We would really like you to say, if you don't know it, you don't know it, and perhaps that you will find out for them. Don't put spectators at risk. Be receptive to teaching new people the ropes. Perhaps you might leave a card in case there might be a callback. And I have a cat. Let's see, the swarm list histogram in the background of this slide shows that we get our peak in the swarm season in April. It's pretty definitive. Someone from Marin County believed that the peak was actually in May. Marin County may have a somewhat different situation than we have, but this is pretty obvious that our swarm peak is going to be in April. So it means that the bees might be preparing in about a month to do their swarming. So the swarm calls mostly come in the spring. The yellow jacket calls and the extraction calls tend to come in the summer and the fall. More swarms were handled last year than extractions. More swarms or calls have been coming to the swarm hotline every year for each of the past 6 years. Some things that you might be able to share with people who are spectators are how long you've been keeping bees, how many colonies you have. If this is your first swarm catch, you might mention that. Swarms are safer. Swarms are the safest time for bees. They're really quite chill. Bees are full of honey when they leave the hive. And when they're in a swarm, they're cool, so their flight muscles are cool, so they're not inclined to fly, and they will fly poorly, and they'll be loaded down with extra weight. They're not protecting brood. The guard bees are not active. The swarm came from probably less than a block away. Swarms stay where they are for a couple of hours to a couple of days before moving on to a place that the scout bees have identified and voted on as being the right place to go. And you can mention Honeybee Democracy, the book by Tom Seeley, in case they're really interested in the details. Swarms are at least twice as likely to survive in a beekeeper's yard than on their own. Typically, 18% are reported to survive on their own, and in a beekeeper's yard, it's probably 40 to 80% surviving to the next year. We know that our ACBA swarm collectors are beekeepers who will move the bees to their yards. If the caller wants to make a donation to the club has a PayPal link on the swarm page. Checks can be written to Alameda County Beekeeper Association and sent on to the treasurer.
Jerry, your slideshow is not moving. Oh, good. Now it is.
So the basic kit, 5-gallon buckets, hive tool, veil, jacket, gloves, a sheet is a very important tool to have in your kit. If you expect to collect bees at any height, having a pole that you can attach to your bucket. Hive box, cargo straps to strap everything together so that it doesn't fall apart in your car and release bees all over your vehicle. Pruners, but please make sure you have permission before cutting anything. Often people will say, oh, you could cut anything you want. I try and collect the bees without having to prune anything. Usually that's possible. Sometimes it's not. Duct tape, twine, cord, utility knife. Smoker can be used sometimes, but you really have to think through what the consequences of using the smoker are. Plastic buckets, of course, you can get food grade white buckets from a deli or a restaurant or someplace like that. You can also order them, but if you order them, you'll probably pay a lot more than getting the free ones and cleaning them up. Laundry bags with the very fine mesh work pretty well to put over a bucket. They let the bees hang from them. They let the bees circulate some air, but they don't let the bees out. If the holes in the laundry bag are too big, the bees will actually crawl through them. A retired bed sheet works very well, spread under wherever the bees are clustered. In case you have to knock them down or in case they fall down onto the ground, it's better to get them off of the sheet than get them out of the grass. Pre-test your bucket and pole arrangement. Make sure it's sturdy enough, won't fall apart, and will hold up to whatever abuse you're going to inflict upon it. Ask how big the swarm is before you leave home, so you make sure that you take enough equipment to accommodate the swarm. Pictures are really helpful because usually the estimates by the reporter are wildly off. a basketball size bunch of bees might actually be what we would call maybe a pineapple, or maybe even smaller. If you use smoke, sometimes depending on where the queen is and what the situation is, by smoking the bees, you can drive the queen to where you can't get to her. On the other hand, if you know where the queen is, perhaps you can use the smoke to coax her to go whichever way you would really like her to go. Safety first. Please, please be safe out there. So what's the problem on the left-hand side? How is the beekeeper going to manage to hold a bucket when the bucket is 5 or 6 or 7 pounds heavier after the bees have fallen into it? And it might even cause him to lose balance or fall down. On the right-hand side, for instance, having a bee box supported by a board between ladders, and it doesn't look like that assembly is strapped. So if it does fall down, it's going to be all over everywhere, and the bees are going to be all out over everywhere. Working on ladders is just really not a terribly good idea. If you can figure out any way to avoid it, we recommend that you do. Don't work around power lines, be aware. It's better that the swarm escape than either yourself or spectators be injured or some other disaster be caused by trying to get the bees. Call for help from an expert or get advice from somebody else on the swarm list in case you have a situation that needs to be handled. Most of the people who are the swarm hotline volunteers have enough experience that they'll be able to coach you or get you the resource that you need. So now when getting a hotline call, that the volunteer takes the hotline call. The first member of the swarm list who makes a claim for that call after it's posted is the one who gets to decide where the bees go, gets to be the person that goes out after them. The member who, the member phones the caller, then responds, goes after the bees. The member collects the swarm and takes it home, but the devil is in the details. If you've already claimed a swarm and collected it in the last couple of days, please hold back for 10 or 20 minutes to give somebody else an opportunity. You might announce that you can get the bees if you want to put yourself in line, but you would rather that somebody else who has not had a call recently or somebody who doesn't have bees get some priority. If you've got a whole yard full of bees and you're just out there for the fun, please be sympathetic to the beekeepers who have no bees. But we also understand that beekeepers may not have the time or may not be brave enough to go out and collect their first swarm. So it's kind of an iffy situation. We'll take a list, for instance, of beekeepers who would like to get bees, but sometimes they just won't be available when the bees are available. So it makes for quite a juggling act by the volunteers to try and balance things out. But basically, the first person who gets the claim is generally the person who goes after collecting the swarm. The swarm hotline volunteer takes down the information, gets the details, gets the phone number, the address. The volunteer posts to the listserv the description of the swarm, the city, the neighborhood. The list member emails back to claim the swarm, but keep in mind that you have to be able to respond right away. If you're not, don't make the email. We hope that you will have sufficient competence to actually accomplish the collection that needs to be done. So stay within your wheelhouse, or at least not too far out of it, so that you can expect to have some success. Know what you're doing before you claim. Be receptive to new beekeepers to help them learn how to do this. So let other people contact you to come and tag along and watch what's going on. Usually the information on the swarm goes to the swarm catcher via email or text. Please, when you're using the web interface to the swarm hotline or swarm email list, identify yourself. So many times we have bothersome delays because the person who makes the claim doesn't tell us who they are. Oh, I'll take that one, and they don't say who they are. So then we have to go fishing around to try and figure out who that person is. Please identify yourself. More details. The one who makes the claim phones the caller bank reasonably promptly. Don't wait off for an hour or something. In fact, you're supposed to be on your way within a half an hour. And the caller would really like to know what the situation is, when somebody will come. You would like to know if the swarm already left. You would like to get the caller to send you a photograph. Members collect the swarm and generally leave a catch box until dark. The member leaves the catch box, picks up the catch box at sunset when all the bees have settled in. No, it is not okay to leave in the middle of the day when the foragers and the scouts are still out. Please try and get them all. Please, one way or another, do something about that. Donations are accepted by PayPal or by check. Whoever claims the swarm is the one that gets the swarm. Observers and helpers can volunteer to come along and help, but they're there to help out. They're not there to try and get those bees for themselves. If you've claimed a swarm in the last couple of days, please hold off. Or if you've collected a swarm in the last couple of days, please hold off. If you've missed a swarm, then feel free to make another claim. We like to give maybe a 10 or 20, 30-minute window for the newbie beekeepers or the beekeepers who have not collected a swarm. Try and keep your calendars a little bit open in the middle, upper middle part of the afternoon, because that's when the swarms tend to come out and get noticed. The volunteers actually get a free pass to one swarm collection in the year as a kind of a thank you for their service. But otherwise, the volunteers are committed to announcing the swarm out to the email list so that members of the swarm list can go and collect those bees. Swarm basics: bees are chill when they're out there. This is information that you can know and use yourself and that you can share with the civilians out in the field. They naturally want to maintain a low profile. Sometimes you can, or often you can collect a swarm, particularly the small ones, without really having to suit up. Sometimes the time that it takes to suit up, or even just the time that it takes to get your gear out to where the swarm is, can be enough time for the swarm to actually move away. I've heard that problem reported more than once. Bees will usually do what you expect them to do. So use your beekeeper knowledge and handle them appropriately. Swarms will usually hang around for up to 2 days, but don't count on it and don't dawdle. And that's why we would like beekeepers who are out collecting swarms to get on their way promptly. I'm trying to figure out where I am in my notes. Sorry for the delay, folks. So we would like to have all of the swarms that we collect to be like the one on the left-hand side, but sometimes, and actually pretty often, we'll have a case where the bees are tangled up in something that makes them more difficult to extract from. Sometimes you can Get those bees out of the situation on the right-hand side by using a scoop. You just keep scooping bees until you get the queen. I've seen a video of Sung Lee getting a colony of bees that was on a wall, and he was scraping hive tool full by hive tool full until he found the queen. And when he found the queen, he put her in a queen cage, put them in the queen in the nuke box, and then kind of started scooping the rest of the bees much more casually toward the box. And because they smelled the queen there, they joined the queen. So sometimes you can use a piece of comb to try and lure the bees or scoop them off of the branch. They like to be on comb because it's kind of like home. In a desperate situation, it may be appropriate to use a bee vac, but not a lot of us have a bee vac. Some of us do. And sometimes if the bees are in an awkward place, maybe the best choice is just to use a bait hive and hope that the bees move in. So the easiest situation is the case where you shake the bees off of a branch. The branch on the left this is the same branch on the right as it is on the left. Lower the branch into the bucket, hold it with your hand, take your other hand, and from a couple inches up, thump your wrist so that the branch gets a shake, and then the bees lose their grip on the branch and they fall into the bucket. And you notice how they crawl up the side of the bucket. That's pretty typical behavior. They usually stay in. Wait for if you have a situation where you've bumped bees off of a branch, but you didn't get them all and a lot flew up into the air, just be patient, wait a few minutes. The bees will settle down where they were before, and then you can bump another bunch into your bucket and add them to the ones in your catch box. If you have the queen, they will stay in your catch box. If the queen is still up on the branch, the bees will kind of evaporate out of your catch box and rejoin the queen up above. I had a situation once where it took me about an hour to get bees out of a tree where there was a tangle of I think it was internet wires or telephone wires and branches. And I got a bucket full of bees into my catch box, and from across the street, it looked like the catch box was evaporating bees up to the tree. And then I got the bucket in a place where I actually got the queen, got her into the hive box. From across the street, it looked like it was raining bees that were just over the period of 20 minutes coalescing into the box. So where the queen is where the bees want to go. Be careful where you step, because sometimes if you knock the bees down and they end up on the ground, maybe that queen is down there among them. There was another case where after the caller moved the pickup truck off of the driveway, I was looking at the rest of the bees that were there, and there was the queen marching across the driveway. So collecting her and getting her back into the box was absolutely the thing to do before taking that box home. Another common case, we get several a year of cases where bees are on the ground, perhaps in a street, perhaps in a parking lot. Offer them a box with a hole cut in the side of it along the edge. And the bees see this as a nice shelter which they can move into. And if they've been reading the books, they will do it very nicely for you after in a short period of time. As I said before, if you don't happen to have the queen in your box, the bees will vacate your box and move back up to wherever the queen happens to be. Another somewhat fun situation is where the bees are under something like an awning or under an umbrella. If the umbrella is portable, you can carry it over to where your catch box is, but spread out your sheet on the ground and put your catch box on it before you shake the bees out of the umbrella. Otherwise, they'll be shaken down into the grass, and it's no fun. It takes a long time for them to figure out how to get back to where the queen is in the box. And with the sheet, you can lift up the corner of the sheet and sort of shake the bees toward the bee box, and that simplifies things considerably. If the umbrella cannot be moved, then perhaps the right strategy is to have some sort of scoop that you can just scoop handfuls of bees off of from whatever the piece of furniture is and deposit them into your box. And when, again, if you find the queen and put her in a queen cage, put her in your box, then you can be a little more cavalier about getting the bees to move. You can just shake them and get them into the air, or you can use a smoker to get them to move from wherever they happen to be. And they will find the queen in the box because they smell her there, rather than coming back to the piece of furniture. Speaking of furniture, there's another case where your sheet will be very handy. You lift up the barricade and slide your sheet underneath the barricade. Then you lift up the barricade for a couple of inches and let it fall down onto the asphalt, and the bees lose their grip on the barricade and fall down onto the sheet. And then you've converted the whole problem into something that's much more easy to handle than trying to scoop or brush bees off of a barricade. Same goes for something like a picnic table or a picnic bench. But again, where the object is securely anchored to the ground, that might not be possible. So you'll have to use some other strategy. I'm not fond of using bee brushes because they kind of tend to roll the bees. It seems like more like abuse than proper beekeeping practice. Now, one of the tougher situations is when bees are on a chain link fence. Some people have had success taking a frame of brood comb and putting it up against the fence and having the bees crawl onto the brood comb. And eventually you find that the queen is on the piece of brood comb and you shake her into the box. Another possible option would be to take the catch box and tie it up against the fence and let the bees find their way into the box because they'll be attracted by the comb. And if they look like they're somewhat receptive to this and you're kind of running out of time, it might be possible to use smoke to coax them off of the fence and into your catch box. But try not to blow smoke through your catch box because that might just make things a little bit too confusing. Sometimes with fences, it works to use a bee vac if you happen to have a bee vac. So then another common case for beekeepers collecting swarms is the long reach. On the left, someone has a pole connected to some sort of structure that's connected into the bottom of what looks like a 4.5 or 5 gallon bucket. And that increases your reach up to anywhere from 15 to 25 feet, depending on the weight of the bucket, the flimsiness of the pole, and your skill and balance. The poles that are used for window washing on second-story buildings, those telescoping poles make a pretty decent support for a bucket if it's not too heavy. One way to make a bucket that's not too heavy is to use a water cooler carboy and somehow fix the business end, the handle end of a paint roller in the neck of the carboy, and then you can screw anything like a mop handle, or not a mop handle, but a broom handle or one of those extender poles for cleaning windows into that thread of the paint roller, and then use that to reach your bees up high. It has the feature of being fairly light, fairly sturdy, and you can actually see through it, so you get a little bit of an idea of how your efforts banging on the branch are paying off. Now, here's a situation that we don't really want to get involved with ourselves, and we leave this to the professionals. Stay away from power lines. If you have an extension pole that's aluminum, be particularly cautious about operating near power lines. And even if you have an insulating pole, be careful around any kinds of lines that are stretched through trees. You could perhaps get these bees, if it's a swarm, by setting up a bait hive. You might be able to attract them with a bait hive. But it turns out in this particular case, you can see that they've built comb on this power pole. So leave that to the professionals. The power company probably shuts down the power to this pole before the beekeeper goes up and does the work. So last resort, a bee vac is often a handy tool, but they have to be designed to be not so lethal to the bees, but they can be used to collect otherwise uncollectible bees. Poorly designed vacs will have the bees go down the tube and slam into an obstruction at the very end and then drop into the vacuum. That's particularly true of these bee vacs that are made with the bucket head vacuum cleaner. You can find probably any number of projects, do-it-yourself projects with a bucket head vacuum cleaner on the internet. But they just seem a little bit too problematic to me. Besides, the size of the hose is so small that the bees tend to get plugged up in it. And sometimes you can, when the bees get scrambled up too much, they can regurgitate their honey, and then you end up with a sticky mess. Not great for the bees. So that's about it. This sort of scratches the surface for swarm collecting. Most swarms fall into one or several of those other categories that were distributed here, but there are always surprises. Extractions, there's just an infinite variety of them. They find their way into all kinds of structures between walls, in attic spaces and so forth. Thing is, most of us common beekeepers don't have the construction chops to understand where the bees are, how best to get to them, and how best to do the repairs afterward. So that's kind of a situation where we tend to leave the extractions to the professionals. The exception might be the playhouse or the tool shed, where whatever you do can't be so damaging that you risk the integrity of somebody's house. So that's about it. If we were at an in-person meeting, perhaps we could go out and demonstrate how a pole is used to bash into the trees to free the bees up, or how you would get bees off of a branch of a bush, but not this time around. So any questions?
Yes, Jerry, I have a question. You had a slide showing the bees all spread out on the pavement. What would be the technique for collecting those bees?
Well, that's where the, let's get back to that. There we go.
Yeah.
So,
one, yeah.
See the box on the right? Oh, darn it. So much for responsiveness here. Okay, see the box on the right, cardboard box. Along the bottom edge, you cut out like a 2-inch by 2-inch door, and you shove the side of that box right up against the pile of bees on the sidewalk or driveway or parking lot. And the bees just discover that this is a great place to move into, and they start marching in. Another way to do this is to have maybe a stick that you kind of slide into where the pile of bees are, and you take your bee box with just the bottom of the frames exposed, and you carefully place that bee box over the top of the pile so that it's resting on the stick. And then the bees find their way up the stick and into the box and onto the comb. So they're looking for a dark place to move into that smells good. And even though the box on the right doesn't have any lemongrass oil or anything to attract the bees, they seem to like to move into it. But certainly the placing your box above where the pile of bees is an attractive alternative to using the cardboard box.
Yeah, Jerry, there was somebody who mentioned last year that the Crown Royal box, if you're at the liquor store, is the perfect size that fits frames. So that became their go-to swarm catching cardboard box, because you can throw a couple of frames in there and cut your little trap door on it. Crown Royal. You don't have to buy the whole case of liquor though.
I have a cranky cat. Anything else? Anybody else?
You mentioned using a window washer pole for, reaching way up in the trees. I've got a couple what were old swimming pool telescoping aluminum poles that are quite sturdy then. They're lightweight, but they're sturdy. And if you attach the bucket to the end of those, I've got one that extends out really tall and then a slightly smaller one that I can use for lower access. So if you know somebody that has a pool and they've broken the end off of it or something, I happen to get these from somebody else and I've hung on to them. It's funny, I've held on to them over the years and like, ta-da, now I have a use for them.
I think we bought our extension pole off of Amazon for, $20 or $30 or something like that. Definitely worth it, considering that a swarm or rather a package of bees is pushing $150, $200 these days in some cases. What's Mount Diablo selling them for this year? At least 100. So an investment in some equipment to go out and chase swarms is worthwhile. It's fun and it's a great community service.
Another good pole option is if you are a gardener, is buying a nice pole saw set. So if you're going to trim your trees anyway, buy a really nice pole saw set, and then you can adapt it for catching bees. Very sturdy.
One of the, this is strictly from the experiences that that I had is whenever they swarm, number one, more than likely there are beekeepers within a block. And through my experience, the bees doesn't fly that far first when they took off from their hive. I would say about 300 feet. So my guess is that if you just want to catch it once, it's one. But if you're looking into in the future, usually I talk to the owner of the property, and then give you a good education. Again, you're an ambassador. So give us some rundown of why they're doing it. You don't have to really freaking out. This is more docile time for the bees, a vulnerable time for the bees. And then in the looking at the next year and year after, and usually I give her like a jar of honey and then my name. So next time when that happens, and they just call me and directly, so you can be there instead of going through the whole the swarm list and so forth. But usually they become your network of in the future references that you can start collecting bees and then you can be the go-to guy for the swarm. So that usually works out really well. So that's one. And then another thing is that the try to practice on, or some of the most cases you cannot really, as Jerry mentioned, finding the queen, but most cases like a low level, if you can just sifting through, you should be able to find the scene. You should be able to see the queen. And I don't know how there you can grab the queen and put in a queen cage. But more than likely, these are mostly docile at the time, at this time point of the swarming. So then that usually works where it makes the job a hell of a lot easier. That's only at the lower level, but when it comes to higher level, these are different strategies and so forth. But again, yeah, that's my take.
If
Thank
you
you.
succeed in getting the queen into a queen cage, you can probably leave her in the queen cage at least overnight until the bees get settled in the whatever hive you put them into in your yard. And another anchor for keeping a swarm in your yard is to give them a frame of open brood. And they'll have something to pay attention to and try and feed. And the pheromones really hold the colony in your box. All right, well, I guess that's probably about it. So I can probably stop recording.